I do not like discounting. I do not like to lead with discounting. It is a disservice to the customer and to the company and to you as a rep to lead with discounting. If your buyers don't value you as an advisor, I would question whether that buyer is a good fit customer and whether they will do everything they need to do to succeed with your platform.
Ready to go? Jeetu, I am so excited for this. Listen, I just chatted to Brian at HubSpot, obviously, before this. He said so many wonderful things. So thank you so much for joining me today.
Oh, appreciate it, Harry. And big thanks to Brian, too. I'm a big fan of your show, so I'm excited to be here.
Oh, that is very, very kind of you. But Brian told me that I had to start with some context, which was you first wanted to be in product. And he said that you didn't get the job. So talk to me about that moment and how you came to HubSpot then as one of the very, very first.
Oh, wow. Yeah, I joked that I was fired even before I started at HubSpot. So back in the day, my business partner and I, Peter Caputa, who is a former HubSpotter, who's pretty awesome, ran a business together. So Pete and I ran this event registration business that was a mix of Eventbrite and Facebook in those days. And, we made some good progress, but eventually we got to a point where we were like, we need to sell the business and go get real jobs. So we drove to 1 Broadway in Cambridge. We walk into this office, Harry. It's probably 100 square feet. There are 4 people in the office, Brian in one corner, Dharmesh in the other corner, Mark Roberge, who was HubSpot's first VP of sales. You've had him on the show. And Patrick Fitzsimmons, the 4th person, the 4th corner. We walk in and we're like, Brian, we're here to sell you our company. And, Brian goes he just rocks on his chair. He's like, no, we don't need your company, but we'll give you jobs. So he looks at Peter and he's asking Peter, what do you want to do? Pete's like, I want to be in sales. So he looks at Mark and he tells Mark, why don't you go write up Peter's sales contract? And Mark's like, we don't have sales contracts. And Brian's like, just download one and give him a sales contract since we're hiring Peter as a sales rep. And he looks at me and he's like, Jeetu, what do you want to do? And in those days, Harry, my background is in computer science. I was the the person who generated all the code with Peter in our startup. So I was like, Brian, I want to be a product manager. And Brian goes again like this. And he's like, nope, I'm HubSpot's product manager. We don't have a job for you. So while Peter's writing his contract with Mark, getting his sales role, I'm kind of standing at the entryway of this 100 square feet office wondering, what the heck do I do now? 2 years later, Brian and the recruitment team reached out and I ended up joining 2 years later as a sales rep.
So clearly they liked you so much post hiring you that they decided to send you far away as soon as possible because they put you in charge of international G2 and you did such an amazing job. Brian was telling me all about what a killer you were for them, opening up 8 offices around the world. First office in Dublin. Can you talk to me? What are your single biggest piece of advice when it comes to going international? I know it's broad, but I didn't want to corner you.
Yeah. I think the one that I would always keep in mind is international is a huge opportunity for any company. If you look at the S&P 500, which is the 500 largest companies in the US by market cap, half of their revenue comes from outside the US. So I would be thinking about international, this huge leg of growth, which I think any serious company that's going to be multi-billion someday should be thinking seriously about. The other advice I would give you, and because we went through this, is we were going to open Dublin in 2012, but we shelved the idea because our retention metrics were not great. Our gross retention was low 70s. Essentially, the economics were not ready to make that big investment to open an international presence.
What is ready, G2, do you think?
What I would say is I would look at something like LTV to CAC. Have you figured out how to acquire customers at reasonable CAC and then keep them around through great service. So you have great LTV to CAC. In 2012, our LTV to CAC was probably, for every dollar we would put in, we would get $2 to $3 back. But we got it closer to 4, 5, 6 over time. And I think that was like, all right, we have great product market fit, not just with acquiring customers, but we can keep them around. And that's when we decided to pull the plug or, go ahead and open Dublin in 2013.
Jeetu, did CACs get worse or better over time? If you think about the CACs of enterprise in year 1 of doing it versus the CACs of enterprise in year 4 of doing it, so remaining in that segment, is it the same? Is it less? Is it more?
I would say it was higher in the earlier years and then plateaued or flattened after we got enough of brand recognition. But it actually did go up in the earlier years.
And so then we have like good enough CACs to LTVs, and we're like, you know what, we're ready to go international. What did HubSpot do really well to enable the international expansion to be a success?
There were a couple of things we did that I think were really key to our success. One is when we opened Dublin, it was an expensive investment. And we were like, all right, it's expensive, but it's a big bet for us. So when we opened the office, we actually sent an expat team of 5 people from the Cambridge office, and we hired 5 people in Dublin. It was like this 1-to-1 match, Harry. Like, it was crazy in those days, but we were like, we're picking the right market, we're hiring with great quality, and we're going to give them the right resources. So if it fails, it's not because we didn't do everything we could control. We did everything we could control. So that was one thing we did, is just simply like over-invest in the early days to get the right team on the ground with the right help.
What ARR were we at when we made the expansion into Dublin?
Oh, it was tiny. It was like 3 million ARR when we opened Dublin.
Would you not advise an angel investment today that is too early? I would say you have not nearly saturated your domestic core market. Absolutely double down there until you're at 20, 25, 30.
In our world, and I still think it's true, is maybe 10 years ago to do international, like, boy, it's a huge investment. I don't think it's that type of an investment today because you've got much more efficient go-to-market motions like PLG, freemium, and also with digital CS, like you can acquire global customers and be able to service them in a really efficient manner.
So that's really interesting. So with the different methods that we have today, PLG, digital CS, would you still advise companies to go international as early as you did?
I would, as long as your core market has good economics. If your core market doesn't, then understandably hold off, like you're not ready to go into a completely different region. I would also add, when you go international, like you're going to get some signals, Harry, like the markets pull you in. It's not like, you wake up one morning and you're like, all right, it's time to go international. So for example, in our case, in those days, we had signals with like partners in the UK who were doing great. We were getting inbound leads, just not from the US, but from lots of English-speaking Europe. So in some ways, almost like with the work we were doing in the US, it was resonating in other parts of the globe, and the market was pulling us in. So the market was pulling us in, and what we ended up doing is like, all right, before we opened the office, I ended up hiring a bunch of young dads who would show up at 4 a.m. in Cambridge because they wanted to get home at 2 p.m. to be with their kids. And we were like, let's validate that demand. So we were selling early in the morning from Cambridge, calling into the UK. And we proved out that thesis that we can acquire and retain them before we actually ended up opening Dublin in 2013.
I mean, I love that in terms of validating the demand there with the time zones. Can I ask then, is time zones the only reason you do international expansion today? Given the technologies that we have to make cross-border selling and great product experience and great touch points with customers so easy, is time zone the only reason that you do international expansion today?
I think time zone is a big one. You do get leverage by hiring talent in different geographies at different price points. So remember LTV to CAC, like the other way you can influence that ratio is getting talent at a better price point in other countries. I would also say partners matter. I think partners want to see that you're committing to the market by having talent in their country. Customers care about, like, if you're selling and servicing Germany, like, you can get by to a certain extent, but at a certain point, they want to actually see your brand in Germany.
Do you always have to send talent from the core home destination to indoctrinate the new talent in the new country?
I think it was a playbook that worked for us really, really well. The idea is, like, you bring this, what I would call a tiger team. The tiger team coming from Boston is going to be in Dublin, paired one-on-one or in a really nice ratio. They help hire, onboard, help these early teams succeed. And over time, you figure out how to fire yourself and you leave that team and leave it to local leadership. The tiger team tends to be there between 6 to 12 months.
Okay.
6 to 12 months. And in my case, for example, like, there's this whole idea of, like, you need to get a local leader. I was the local leader in Dublin. While I was in Dublin, I took one of the members of the Tiger team. His name was Sam Schulman, and Sam moved to Sydney to open our Australia operation and be, part of the landing team. So this playbook of sending an expat team, they open one office, they stay 6 to 12 months, they figure out that region, then they get shipped to another office so they can go and open that region and that office.
Did you find rep ramp time? I know this is a very specific question. Did you find a rep ramp time varied by geography?
It did. It did vary by geography. And what I would say is the countries that were similar to the US, UK, Netherlands, like, the ramp time was comparable. In fact, the economics were actually even better for some of those countries in Europe.
What was that ramp time? Like, how long was it before you expected people to start closing and start paying for themselves?
Depending on the segment, like, the ramp time is somewhere between 6 to 9 months. And, it's sort of like, it's like this, can be a little bumpy, but once you get to that 6 to 9 month mark, you can start seeing, like, a fairly consistent trajectory as they ramp to greater productivity. But yeah, it's been 6 to 9 months.
So I'm so interested. I know we had the schedule, but sod it, I'm enjoying this too much. How large an ACV, average contract value or customer value, do you have to justify a sales rep?
So we've got different segments, right? Like small business, mid-market, corporate. They have different targets. Their, what we would call on-target earnings would vary too. But I would say if you are sort of like mid-market, like HubSpot sweet spot, which we would define as 25 to 500 employees, you need an ACV of somewhere between 10 to 12K ACV to make it work from a return on rep investment.
But when you were 3 million ARR and in Dublin in the early days, you were only serving SMBs in those days, correct?
Yeah, yep. It was largely up to 500 employees, like small and mid-market companies. I would say, I think what you're getting to is, like, the economics are hard when you are in that ACV, and that is true. But as we added more products, as retention got better, the reps could cross-sell and upsell other products, like rep PPR started to increase. So the economics worked over time. But in the early days, yeah, like, it was an investment. It was, LTV to CAC, 1:4, 1:5. And over time, depending on the segment and geography, it became 1:7, 1:8.
When you look back with the benefits of hindsight, Jeetu, what were some of the biggest mistakes that you did in the international expansion?
I would say as we expanded globally, Harry, we use this framework that we would call operational complexity and the size of the market. You can almost think of, like, all right, I pick a country and I say, is it easy or difficult to do business in it? I would call it the operational complexity. And then I would say, okay, for that country, what is my TAM or addressable market? So we graded every country on complexity versus TAM, and you can almost, like, look at a series of bubbles. On the left, the US, big TAM, blue in color because it is low complexity. On the other end, you have something like China, big market, but red in color because of the complexity. And in between, you've got France, Germany, Spain, and all the other countries. Our playbook really worked great in those countries that were closer to the US, like Germany, France, Netherlands, Australia. But as we went to the right, where the complexity increased, let's say Japan, one of the mistakes I made is that playbook of sending an expat team was not an option, Harry, because of the language in Japan. Like they obviously, didn't speak Japanese. So I was not able to send that expat leader to Japan like I was able to do in Dublin and Sydney. So I had to hire from day zero, day one, all local. It was hard to do that tiger team approach. And some of our early hires in Japan, they sounded like me. They sounded like the Westerners. They ate and behaved like the Westerners. And I fell into that pothole because I was hiring like I was hiring in the US or in the UK. And that was a mistake. Because if you want to sell into Japan, you really need to love Japan. You really need to understand the business culture and the way business gets done over there. So I had, a mistake with the hiring in the early days of Japan. The other one I would say is, that operational complexity, Harry? Remember now, like low complexity to high complexity? The color of the bubble tells you, is it red, high complex, blue, easy? And the size of the bubble tells you how big the market is. If you think about your go-to market and you are going into one of those complex countries, like say Japan, for example, it's more on the right side, more complex. I will be thoughtful about your go-to market on being direct or going through partners and our reseller ecosystem. We try to do both. We had a direct team in Japan and also a reseller team. My learning from that experience is when you have a complex country and a product that needs help, like HubSpot Pro or Enterprise does need implementation help, you are better off in those complex countries going through a partner ecosystem as opposed to going all in with the direct sales and CS team. So that was the other lesson we learned is match your go-to market to your product complexity and your country complexity. Don't try and do like a one size fits all go to market in every country. You got to think about the country dynamics, the country complexity, the help customers need when they need to implement your product, and then match that with the go to market that will service them the best.
You mentioned there the CS element. I do want to dive into that later, but I do want to cover sales first because you played such an important role in scaling from 3 million, where you mentioned that with the Dublin office, to either 600 million or a billion. One of the numbers we can go with either. Which one works for you? 600 or a billion?
Let's go with something between 600 and 1 billion.
let's call it an even 800. So my question to you is, it looks like completely up and to the right when you look at HubSpot scaling of their sales revenues. What allowed HubSpot to scale sales so efficiently when you review what you did in the early days in probably that 3 to 30 million range?
I would say the inbound engine with we were creating tons of content that was resulting in leads, that became a machine, Harry. It's still a machine. I really think when I think about moats that HubSpot has, it's like that inbound engine, its blog, its website. The blog still gets about 10 million visitors, even today, each month. All of HubSpot gets I think 30 million approximately each month. The traffic and that inbound engine made it really easy to instrument demand going like this, hiring to service that demand going like this. So it became very much running a calculation to figure out if demand is going like this, let's continue hiring to service that demand. And the ARR just kept going up and to the right. The other one that I would say is what we would call this predictable and scalable approach to growth. We got really good with hiring great sales reps, onboarding them, coaching them, and making them productive. So that whole approach we took of acquiring talent and making them productive was another reason why it worked so well. I think the other one that I think many companies, interestingly, still don't think about today is a partner ecosystem. I still see so many SaaS companies not digging into how do I get efficient growth not just through my talent, but through a partner ecosystem. And HubSpot has about half of its revenue coming through the partner ecosystem. It's big. It's a huge part of HubSpot being driven by these amazing partners.
Okay, so I have to dig in on some elements there. One, on the SEO side, that's insane. 10 million of 30 million going to the blog itself. Question for you, for founders listening today, is that SEO heavy approach still applicable today in a much more challenging SEO environment?
I still think it's something you have to do. Like, I don't think there's like a red herring that, you have like, I do this and there's a non-SEO approach. I think, 10 years or 15 years ago, it was easy with SEO because the formula was like, you got to create content, you got to create blogs, you got to think about your conversion paths. But I do think distribution is harder these days. Like, you got to think about social. You got to think about, your presence on LinkedIn. Are your founders and execs creating content on LinkedIn? So I think the philosophy is still the same, which is it's all about content. But I think the way you think about content, the way you distribute it has gotten really layered. There's just many more layers you need to think about when it comes to like SEO and content. And where do you spread it to get your leads and customers?
I would say it's actually the same. It's just the format with which you can create it has exploded. And so it's like, and the biggest challenge I find with startup founders is actually they do 10 different types of channels. And it's like, no, if you build the most effective SMB sales channel on TikTok, you will have millions of fans and you can redirect that back to your landing page. That's just the same as having a great HubSpot blog in the early days. It's a different format, but it still redirects the same way. And I think that's just the thing that's changed, which is there's just a lot more options in terms of format. Can I ask you on
I think you're right.
On the partner program, I hear you, but I worry that a lot of founders will go, partner programs, that's our holy grail. And they're often a lot harder than people think. They require a lot more investment. What stage should one think about partner programs? And what is required to do partner programs well?
I would say the stage you should start thinking about a partner program is when you have clarity on what role partners can play with your product. If you're a very transactional product, like, you're probably not going to get partners to like bundle services on top of HubSpot, because the way they make money is through retainers and services they offer to their clients. In the case of HubSpot, it worked really well because we needed partners to help customers create content, landing pages, do analytics. And the same thing has played out in all the other hubs that HubSpot has offered over the last many years. So I would say, think about it when you're clear that there's a need for other people to help your customers succeed. And other people could be just not like service providers. It could be app partners. It could be ecosystem partners. So that's probably the stage that I would start thinking about partners.
What level of investment is required for a partner program to be successful?
I would say you do need someone to think about like partner acquisition and partner enablement. And I also think founders should not make it super complicated, because just like when you're selling to prospects by creating content, your content is going to get found by partners also, right? And that's what happened with HubSpot, is all the content we were creating was getting found by partners. And they would call in saying, hey, we found you through your content, and I actually want to offer services on top of HubSpot to my end customers. And Peter Caputa, who I would consider as the founder of HubSpot's partner program, connected the dots. And he was like, all right, like, we need someone to help our customers. We have these hundreds of partners over there who are calling and saying, we would like to offer services on top of your product. We were like, all right, like, how do we enable these partners? How do we teach them what services they should offer? How do you price those services? How do you sell those services? So I would go back to, you need someone to help you think about partner enablement.
Does every company not want someone to help their customers extra leverage? I like statements where you can prove or disprove them. When you have like, sure, you want to help my customers? Yeah, great. Thanks, Jeetu. Everyone would want that. but it requires an insane investment upfront to get it over the line. It requires incredible education on partner integrations, that onboarding, how they talk about your product, how they educate customers to your product, and then the lifecycle management of that. I think it's so much more complex than just like, hey, when you need more help. Do you know what I mean?
By the way, I'd push back a little bit. I don't know if every company would need that help from partners, because sometimes companies are building products that are purely like PLG driven, all the way from being acquired to renewing. It could be very SMB. Maybe Dropbox is an example. I don't think partners play a big role in like that type of a product. But when you do need services help, and you don't need it to be just your team providing those services help, and you have to keep in mind, partners will just not say, yeah, we're just going to do what you want us to do. They're like, how do I make money? How do I like create more cash flow in my business? How do I make my business more attractive to outside investors? So this is where like you need to think about like, well, what are the services partners can offer? You do make an interesting point, which is it is expensive. And I wouldn't say you have to always do this, but one of the things HubSpot did in the early days, and to some later stages too, is if you want to become a partner, you need to buy HubSpot. You need to learn the product. You need to learn how to generate leads using HubSpot. So it's almost like you're being treated like a customer. You prove yourself out, and at the right time, you can become a member of HubSpot's partner program.
Can I ask you, what broke in the HubSpot scaling of sales teams?
What broke when scaling HubSpot sales team? There are a couple that come to mind, Harry. Like if I just maybe use international as an example, one of the things we saw like when we went to Germany is our English content that we were creating. Half of our leads coming in from Germany, prospects in Germany, were reading our English content. That was actually really cool because we were able to get a fair amount of demand just from English content, and even before we started localizing into German. So that helped us like, all right, we can get a sales team going, but we also knew we needed to invest in German content to fill the funnel with more leads that will get found by a German content and just not through our English content. Where it did break is we underestimated that effort in Japan, because in Japan, only 1% of Japanese prospects were getting found by our English content. So we had to like, I think we overestimated the speed at which we could get that Japanese funnel going. And it took us a while to get it going. And I believe it's in a great place today. The other one that I would say...
Were you tempted to pull Japan? The team wasn't working there. The content wasn't working there. If I was in leadership, I'd be saying, let's get the fuck out of here.
I'm not sure, Harry. I think, if you are at HubSpot scale, 2 billion plus, I'm sure HubSpot's going to work its way to multi-billion. You have to figure out Japan.
No, I totally agree with you in terms of, you just need more customers, and there comes a point where you just have to find literally physically more humans to adopt your product. Can I ask you, you did Japan when it was hard. When you look back, what did you not do? It could be in sales, could be just generally, that you wish you had done.
There are a couple I'll give you. One is, interestingly, there are markets like Brazil, India that are starting to get pretty attractive. But to succeed in those markets, you need to think about like local talent. You need to think about currencies. And, now we're starting to like get more serious about those markets. Like, we have a bunch of like great activity happening in India. So that would be one that I wish we started a little earlier, is thinking about like countries and the entity strategy. The other one that I wish we started sooner is, there was a point, Harry, that we were getting MRR from 150 countries. It was nuts. Like there was revenue coming from every country. And it got really hard from an investment standpoint to prioritize like, hey, how do we like keep growing when we have MRR and demands from all these countries? So it became like really like watered down. So what we decided to do over time is like, we're going to take a portfolio strategy, which is like, there are 150 countries, but which are the countries we want to be number one or number two? not number 3, number 1 or number 2. So we call them like accelerated growth countries. And there were only 7 countries that made up that accelerated growth. And then there was a second bucket that we called steady growth that would get like what we would call run rate investments. And then a third bucket that was like more like partner-led efficient growth. So we did that in a later stage where we were like, we can't keep operating like this. We only have finite budgets, and we need to think of it as a portfolio where there's a small group of stocks and countries that we gotta like win and be number 1 or number 2. So that happened over time.
Which country did you think you'd be a success in, and it was way harder than you thought? And which were you like, ugh, that's going to be shit, and it was way better than you thought?
Japan in the early days was tougher, but it's having good traction now. Really hard. It was really hard. Germany was hard, but we knew what we had to do, which is what I mentioned earlier. Is like if you're thinking about a non-English country, think about your demand even before you go and open an office. Like I would almost hire a marketer before you actually hire your first sales rep, maybe 18 to 24 months in advance, so they can get the work.
That's interesting. Why would you do that, and how would you structure that?
The way I would think about it is like, why would you have sales reps showing up at an expensive office with no leads and purely cold calling? Like that's not the most efficient way to set up your team for success.
Is it AE's responsibility to acquire their own leads?
I would say in today's world, it's a mix of, if you're investing in marketing, well, let's get an ROI on marketing. But we also have to appreciate that marketing can be responsible for like the full number. There's a percent of that number that needs to come from AE's own activities, working with BDRs through other non-marketing type effort.
Everyone says BDRs and SDRs is dead now. The cold outbound, the cold email, the cold LinkedIn, so 2015. Do you agree, or do you think that's a glib statement?
I would not fully agree with it. I would partly agree with it it's not the most efficient go-to-market when you have pure cold calling with BDRs. But when you get much more sophisticated, you think about your target market, you think about your target lists, you think about first-party and third-party signals that you can get today when buyers are researching solutions like yours. So you're not doing a pure outbound, pure cold call, what we would call like almost like all bound, Harry. It's a mix of inbound and outbound, whereby you're knocking on doors, but it's the right doors. When you speak with them, they have some pain. And this is where it comes back to like, how do you enable your BDRs and AEs to be able to have those type of conversations when they don't know your brand, but we know there's a pain that they're trying to solve.
In the early days, do founders need to create the playbook, the sales playbook?
I do strongly believe that founders need to play an active role in the creation or the co-creation of the sales playbook. And I would also encourage all founders early stages, I don't know, until you get to 100 or more customers, you need to be on every sales call. Of course, we'll have to figure out like, are they qualified prospects? But if they're qualified prospects, you want to be on sales calls. And I'd say for a few reasons, Harry. One is you're not like filled with dozens of sales reps. You have maybe in the early days, couple, maybe 2-3 sales reps. And there's some magic in the early days when a prospect hears from a founder on why they built the product. What is the vision of the product? And prospects know like you are a no brand company. You're in the early days of speaking directly with the founder. So I think it helps, win in those early days. The other is, I don't think founders get everything right on day one. HubSpot didn't get everything right on day one. We made several tweaks, pivots over time. You do need to create that feedback loop. And founders, what better way than to be on a live call hearing about prospects and what challenges they're dealing with, so you can create that feedback loop back into the product development.
Speaking of creating feedback loops, I always think about momentum and building momentum in teams. To what extent would you advise early sales teams to focus on amazing marquee logos, or just getting a load of customers in the door, high velocity, flood it with customers? Which approach would you focus on?
It's a good question, and I'm sure many or some will not agree with me. If you're in my school will be stop chasing elephants. So if you are a mid-market company, you have a big addressable market. Sure, a large marquee logo is expressing interest. Engage with them, but don't count on them as your answer to hitting your target. You want to still be prospecting into good fit companies who have reasonable sales cycle and which will help you build a predictable pipeline to get to your target. I think the risk is with marquee logos is people just get attracted to the sexiness of a marquee logo. And then you show up in the last day of the quarter only to realize the marquee logo sales or buying process and buying cycle doesn't match with your sales process. So I would say don't go all into marquee logos. If you're a mid-market company, figure out how to diversify your pipeline.
I totally agree. I also find that actually people do it because they think it will lead to subsequent immense customer acquisition. And actually it has a much smaller impact than you think working with a large name company. People are generally like, well, it's only one or two of their divisions. Well, they've just got a new CEO who doesn't know what they're doing. Well, they just raised a big round of funding, and so they're spending a load on tools. And so often people always reduce the importance of it anyway.
I always say like revenue and customer acquisition, customer delight solves most problems. Like you just got to figure out like how to create that momentum.
Do you think it's unfair to say sales reps are coin operated?
You do need to be money motivated if you want to be in sales or in any revenue producing team. And that's just the reality of the role. And you also need to figure out, like at the end of the day, the coins only keep coming and keep growing when your customers are succeeding. If you are coin operated and you're just acquiring customers for the sake of acquisition and they don't stick around and you have a leaky fund, that's not going to work for you long term, Mr. or Miss Sales Rep.
Speaking of coin operated and those coins keep coming, any big lessons on sales comp plans for sales teams?
Big lessons would be, at the end of the day, I would say a sales comp plan just drives behaviors at the end of the day. Like if you don't get the comp plan right, you're just going to end up with like potentially bad customers, bad behavior, bad culture. I would also add, when you think about sales comp plan, think about like what phase of growth you are in as a business. Like if you're an early stage founder, early stage company, like velocity matters. Like you might have a sales comp plan that is a bit more indexed towards like just simply raw acquisition. But as you grow bigger, you're going to start like thinking about like retention, cross-selling, upselling. So think about how does your comp plan also evolve as the company and its phase of growth also evolves.
Should customer success not also share in the financial incentive structure of an upsell or a retention?
I believe they should. If you have the sales team that is getting rewarded for acquiring customers, and you have the CS team that's only being recognized for like driving usage, but not getting any recognition in the expansion of the customer, over time, you're going to get CS reps who are like, well, I was the one who helped the customer get the next product or expand into the platform. So I do think when you think about comp plans, you want to be clear about like what role do you want your CS team to play? If your CS team is a pure account management team, maybe there isn't something on the recognition like sales. But if your CS team is a revenue producing team, which is, I believe, every CS team should be a revenue producing team, you want to structure their comp plan in the form of some kind of a base and variable.
When you say a revenue producing team, you mean they are responsible for the upsell and the retention, correct?
That is correct. Now, some teams will generate what we would call SQLs, and the sales team would close it. Other places, CS reps would actually close it.
If incentives drive behaviors, which I think we both agree they do, and you incentivize me, a CS rep, with economics on upsell, Jeetu, my dear customer, I think you could do with our CRM. I know you've got another CRM, but you could do with ours. It's much better for your needs, I promise you. It may not be better for their needs, but the economic incentive alignment is, to me, not to the benefit of the customer. In all cases, there will sometimes be misalignments. How do you prevent misalignments between provider and customer when the economic alignment is between the CS and the upsell?
The way you would do that is having a incentive structure that measures on whether the customer is successful. If they buy a second or third product, are they actually using the product and getting usage out of it? And if they don't, then you know that it was oversold, or the CS rep did not do a great job of positioning the right product to the customer.
Do you see now CFOs bundling spend, moving towards much fewer providers than we used to?
I do see a wave of consolidation. Customers are looking to simplify their tech stack. And I just think, there was some research done by HubSpot not too long ago where SMBs had a tech stack of about 250 apps. It was nuts. It was crazy. And we're seeing a wave of consolidation, or at least while I was at HubSpot, is like, how do I simplify? How do I connect the dots? Because companies and CFOs naturally are like, well, we need our investment to lead to efficient growth. It needs to be more durable and sustainable growth. And you can't do it when you have 10 different solutions disconnected, cobbled together. So they're like, well, how do we bring it all together so we can create alignment between our go-to-market teams so we can find out, like, the work marketing did it result in an ROI on that marketing investment? The customer sales acquired, did they get the right usage and expansion? So I do think having like a unified tech stack makes a difference.
I think brand marketing is largely BS. I know that's unfair of me, so I'm probably going to get pushback on that. How would you push back on that? Because I just see it and I'm like, turn it off for a month and see how revenue goes. And everyone does that. And then like, revenue was not impacted. And they're like, but it could be in years' time. I'm like, okay.
Yeah.
Am I wrong to be rude about brand marketing?
I think you're partly right and partly wrong, Harry. I would say
you're very charming, Jeetu. You can tell me I'm wrong. I sometimes provoke for a
yeah. No, I get where you're coming from, and I would say in the early days, I would be like, yeah, Harry's right. Like, forget spending on brand. Like, put more content out there, and prospects will find the content. It's a lot more predictable. We can attribute it better. But I think with brand marketing, it gets harder with attribution on what that investment is actually resulting in. But I think it does make a difference depending on where you are as a company and what geographies you are going into, what segments you're trying to break into. Because I do think, like, if you're an enterprise, large company CIO looking at a solution, I just don't think you're always going to find the product through content. You're going to probably pay attention to the presence of that brand in different places. I'll give you a simple example. Do you watch Wimbledon? Do you watch tennis?
Of course I watch tennis. I'm a Brit. Yeah, I love Wimbledon.
Perfect. Excellent. So I'm a tennis buff too. And the women's semifinal, one of the players had a HubSpot logo on her sleeve. I think that's brand. That's brand marketing. I don't know how much was paid over there, but I got so many pings like, wow, like, you guys are all over the place at Wimbledon. I mean, it makes a difference. Like, I think it helps like create awareness, and you could still get there, but it will take you so much more effort.
So it's so funny. When I said that, I was thinking the one example that I disagree with actually is, I don't know if you've seen, but Expensify sponsor some form of race car. I don't know if it's F1 or whatever race car it is. And basically for 2 hours, you see the driver and then Expensify like on their helmet. And I'm like, that is great brand marketing. 2 hours flat of just in your face Expensify, or same with HubSpot in this respect with the tennis player who's got it on their arm. What are the biggest ways that startups mess up CS?
By not investing in CS, by getting a team going on an acquisition, but not thinking about retention.
When is the right time to invest in CS?
Just like founders are going to play a role in selling, I do think founders play a role in the really early days with like CS type activities. Like, they need to learn like what it's going to take for a customer to see results and stick around for a long haul. In terms of like the actual hiring of your first, second CS, Harry, I would think about like it in two ways. One is like, how many customers do you have right now? And think about, like to provide engagement to those customers, like, do you need a CS rep or not? The other is like, at what speed are you acquiring customers? Because if you see, customer count getting to a certain point, you should start planning in advance that you do need a CS rep. What I will add that I think is changing now quite dramatically is like, you don't need CS type human engagements all the time. You can do that through self-service. You can do that through digital scaled emotions, whether it's a chatbot, it could be an academy, it could be help content. So do a lot of that. I would probably, as founder, like try and get your first CS rep so you can get the structure and the process in right. But then don't keep investing in CS reps until you get a foundation of like self-help and knowledge and content in place.
Two elements I have to discuss before we do a quick fire. Number one is I often sit on boards and, teams say to me, you know what? That big customer, they slipped to next quarter. And that's why we missed our quarterly goal. And I'm always like, what's the right way to respond to that, Jeetu?
Why don't we role play, Harry? You want to be sales rep? Why don't I'm your manager, or the other way around?
Sure. So like Jeetu, I'm sorry. Like honestly, I thought they were going to land, and they just they didn't, and so they moved into next quarter. Really sorry.
Oh, that's too bad, Harry. Were you counting on that deal to hit your quarterly target?
Yeah, I was.
Okay, well, sorry to hear they got pushed out to the next quarter. What deal stage did you have it sitting in?
Honestly, I was actually just waiting for their approvals. They took it back to the group, the founding team, and I was waiting for them to confirm it.
Okay. Well, let's just pause for a moment, Harry. Walk me through, your sales qualification that led you to putting this deal in almost like closable for the quarter.
Yeah, I met them and they said that they were enough of a champion to get it done on their own, and they said that they had budget. We went through the use cases. It all seemed pretty good, and honestly, it was a really good fit with our core market. And then suddenly they just went a little bit more quiet. And then he said, "Listen, I need to speak to the team and see where we're at." And it's really stalled from there.
What did you uncover in the sales process that got you to determine urgency, or they really needed the solution versus something that would be nice to have long term?
That's a hard one. I think that's the thing that's missing from so many sales processes. And that's the art of the great salesperson, which is how do you create synthetic urgency? Because if we're honest, very few people need HubSpot this month or they're going to die. They can have it next month.
Yeah.
I love HubSpot, but it's not like, oh my God, the world will end. CrowdStrike could happen, to maybe too soon. But there's no catastrophe.
Yeah, there isn't. But I would just say that, what you're talking about is urgency, right? And I think many leaders will maybe disagree with me, but I don't think you can create urgency. Like, you can't create fake urgency. And if you have urgency to hit your number, that's not the urgency your prospect has. So this is where I would be as a sales manager, is like, well, in your sales process, Harry, got pushed to next quarter and you said they have a need for it. Well, tell me, what was the need? I needed more leads. Okay, why do you need more leads? Well, we need to hit our sales targets. Why do you need to hit your sales targets? Well, because we committed to the board 30% growth, and hitting our sales targets helps us get to 30% growth. Okay, great, Harry. What would happen if you don't hit your sales target?
They take me outside and shoot me.
That, or they would put you on a performance improvement plan, right? Like, what would happen if you're on a performance improvement plan, Harry? So this is where, I think, when you're speaking to a customer, I just think sales reps just shy away from asking the tough questions. Why can't you ask personal goals? Why can't you ask about what would life look like, Mr. Customer, if you did not have the solution? because I think this is where like a lot of sales reps just sit on the surface that I call level one. You got to get to level two, level three. And of course, you don't dive right into level three. Like you build rapport, you're an advisor, you're trusted as a sales rep. And you got to be in a situation where it's not like, again, talking of tennis, one player against the other player. It's a doubles match. You and your team are together. Your prospect and you are together. And if you're together, you should be comfortable challenging each other because you want each other to win at the end of the day.
Do you ever do discounting? One way to get people to move faster is say, hey, you know what, Jeetu, and you can be honest, Jeetu, I need to hit my plan. You know what it's like. Listen, I'll give you 25% off if you sign in the next week.
Yeah, I hate that. I hate that. And I do not like discounting. I do not like to lead with discounting. And it is a disservice to the customer and to the company and to you as a rep to lead with discounting. There is a place for discounting, but it should not be so prominent in your sales process unless you have gotten to a point where clearly there's a need. They need to solve that need, but they have a gap in their budget, and you structure the discount to help them get maybe the first year, but the discount goes away in the second year. And maybe other sales leaders believe in discounting, but I am very opposed to discounting.
Great. I like opinions. Fantastic. Good. Customer testimonials. Jeetu, really help me if you could, do a customer testimonial for us. You're at HubSpot, Jeetu. Getting on our website would mean a lot. Is it okay to ask them what are the biggest lessons for startups and how to get customer testimonials and do them right?
I probably lost you over here for a bit, Harry. Were you role playing or were you?
Well, yeah, I was. I was saying, hey, is it okay to ask for customer testimonials? And if so, how's the right way to do them in a sales process?
I would not be asking for customer testimonials in an actual sales process. I would ask for a testimonial after the customer has seen success and results. Are you saying like ask for a testimonial when you're trying to acquire a customer like from net new?
Very often people will say, listen, like, you know what? If you go on our website and we're able to promote you as a customer, we'll give you a 20% discount.
I don't believe in it. And I just think like you are mixing too many variables when your focus should be on what does the customer really need? Like, what is their pain? Connect their pain to a solution. Why are you diluting your value as a sales rep by throwing in testimonials and discounting? And again, you can get to a discount down the road if you do need it to close a gap in budget. But don't play games is the way I think about it. Like if your buyers don't value you as an advisor and value the solution you're recommending through a fairly exhaustive sales process, then I would question whether that buyer is a good fit customer and whether they will do everything they need to do to succeed with your platform.
Listen, Jeetu, I could talk to you all day. So I do want to move into a quick fire round. So I say a short statement. You give me your immediate thoughts. Does that sound okay?
How short? Like 30 seconds?
30 to 60 seconds.
Okay.
But don't worry, no one's going to count the clock. What do you believe that most around you disbelieve?
I believe sales experience is overrated.
Ooh.
I think when you are a highly tenured rep, I think some people believe that it should be weighted the most when hiring a sales rep. I don't think that is true. I think there are other characteristics that I would weigh over sales experience.
I totally agree. I also always think of actually Jason Lemkin, who's like, you'll never get a truly great second sales leader, like second time sales leader to do it again. They know how freaking hard it is. Jeetu's not going to be like, yeah, going to go into another 1 million ARR company and go through that shit again. So I totally agree with you. Tell me, how were the first walls in the Dublin office built? I got told I had to ask that one.
The walls, like the actual physical walls?
Yeah.
They were built, well, I told you that it was like we brought 5 expats, we hired 5 in Dublin. We were sitting in an office that had a little wall kind of like in the center, Harry. And culture is really important to me. And I was like, we need to make sure everyone's learning from each other. It's an open layout. So I called Ken Papa, our facilities guy, who's I think still our facilities leader. And he was like, what do you want me to do? I was like, can you bring the wall down? So he sent someone with a drill, and the guy's like drilling the wall. And I have a picture of all of us with yellow hats on calls while this person behind us is like drilling on walls. So that's maybe, I think, why you were asked to bring up that question.
I love that. Tell me, what's the most contrarian or unorthodox advice for founders listening?
Founders often are math and science driven. They weigh data heavily in their decision making. So if I was a founder, I would not see it as someone else's responsibility to be selling or hoping your product is going to find revenue on its own when it's just not. You need to get on calls with a sales rep or on your own. Make that call, send that email, and believe that customers or prospects will love talking to founders, and founders will be great at selling.
What have you changed your mind on in the last 12 months?
I had some doubts, Harry, on the AI thing and whether AI can truly replace a large part of selling. And from what I'm seeing in the last 6 to 12 months, oh boy, I think that a large part of selling is going to get automated with AI type bots or AI type engines. And I don't think it's going to completely replace salespeople, but it's going to raise the bar. So you as a salespeople need to be even better with the way you're advising your prospects.
Which duties or responsibilities will get automated first, do you think?
I think some form of like discovery where you would spend like 2 hours of discovery. Part of that discovery can actually happen through some form of AI engine where customers are going to be able to like almost like self-discover, what's their challenges, and also almost like get pointed to like, this is the direction you need to go with the solution. But this is where I mentioned the doctor-patient relationship. Like you'll have a direction, but you still need someone on the other end to help you dig further to make sure you're making the right choice.
What sales tactic has died a death, do you think?
There's so many, I would say, besides discounting that we talked about earlier, is no one gives a crap about your product or its features. Like, stop talking about your product and its features when you connect with the prospect. Spend your time understanding the customer, understanding the buyer, what matters to them, their industry, what are they trying to get to, and you will get to your product. But I just think too many sales reps out there still spend way too much time just like spitting a lot of their product and their features out very early in the sales process.
Is that the fault of founders for not teaching them a more efficient sales playbook of customer discovery and qualification?
It's partly the founders. And I think this is where like founders have it in them. It's just they don't know what they don't know. And this is where like if I'm a founder, I mean, there are great resources to go and learn. Like, how do you run like a reasonable sales process? Like, it's not rocket science. I think the challenge founders will have is just simply like, how will prospects react when we ask them all these questions? They're just like hesitant to ask these deeper, harder questions. And I think they do need to work with whether it's their board or mentors and help them get some confidence that they can do this.
I agree. And I actually find that the best customers or the truest customers quite like to be asked. They like to tell you about their business. Personally, it's like investors. At the end of the day, at the end of a fundraising meeting with founders or with LPs, for me, I'll always say, "Do you have any questions?" The best always go, "Yeah, I'd like to understand your business." For founders, they go, "Who are your investors? What's your incentive structure? What's your carry structure?" And I'm like, that's smart.
Yeah, and at the end of the day, like it's probably overused, but customers want to work with salespeople that they like. What they want to do is like you because you care. You want to learn about them and their business, and you want to help them succeed. That's what matters at the end of the day in sales.
Final one for you, because I could talk all day, is what one company sales strategy have you been most impressed by recently?
It's not a perfect example, Harry, but I do think with the way, digital and AI are going, I think Amazon's a great example, like, of how selling is going to evolve. Like, for example, I had a problem with a product the other day. I went to my account. I was like, I have a problem with this product. Like they gave me a list of resources based on my problem. And very next action was like, did it solve your problem? No. All right, we're launching a chatbot so you can speak with a human. Had a chat with an AI chatbot. It got me pretty far, but it didn't give me the actual answer. They're like, all right, hold tight. We're calling you. So someone called me and I spoke with a human on the phone. So I just think that customer experience, which is like digital led, human in the loop, sales rep in the loop, is where the world is going. And I think AI is just going to make it possible and actually accelerate that customer experience.
Jeetu, listen, I've loved doing this. It was very off script, as you saw, but you've been fantastic. So thank you so much for being such a great guest.
My pleasure, Harry. Love the conversation, and I appreciated the back and forth we went, and hopefully no one's too upset with me.